My uncle and aunt, who taught at the University of Wisconsin, were friendly with Max Otto, who was a disciple of Dewey's, and who tried to write a sort of practical version of pragmatism, bringing pragmatism more closely in touch with public life. I read Otto at the time that I met him, but I don't remember his works very well now. The only other philosophy professor whom I was in touch with in my teens was Sidney Hook, who was a friend of my parents. So as it happened, the only philosophy professors I met when young were disciples of Dewey. At an early age, I knew there was such a thing as pragmatism, but as soon as I got to Chicago, I was told that it was a bad thing because people like Robert Maynard Hutchins, who was chancellor of the university, and Mortimer Adler, who was an influential figure on the Chicago scene, were inclined to say that Dewey was a relativist and that we needed moral absolutes. There was a lot of neo-Thomism in the air, and Leo Strauss was also an opponent of pragmatism. So between Adler's neo-Thomism and Strauss's quasi-Platonism, there was a good deal of anti-pragmatism around. So I suppose at Chicago I learned more about what was wrong with pragmatism than what was right about it. Until he was 30, he was still a believing Christian and tried to arrange his philosophical thoughts around the truth of Christianity. After he broke with the Christian religion between the ages of, let's say, 30 and 80, he produced a series of books on various topics, which I don't think fall neatly into periods. Everyone has his favorite Dewey books. My favorite is Reconstruction and Philosophy, and A Common Faith, which were separated by a considerable period. Other people like Experience in Nature. I don't. His prose is remarkably boring. It's very difficult to assign Dewey to students because they go to sleep halfway through the assignment. He wasn't exactly a bad writer, and there are occasionally some vivid phrases and some quotable bits, but compared either to James or Royce, he's a bore. I think that if you ask about the influence of Hegel in the period after Darwin, there are various figures who tried to put Hegel and Darwin together, and of these, Dewey was perhaps the most successful. That is, he shared Hegel's historicism and Darwin's naturalism and managed to synthesize the two. I think that James and Schiller and Dewey thought of themselves as fomenting an intellectual revolution, which was partially successful in the culture as a whole, but not particularly successful within the boundaries of philosophy departments. I'm not sure that the philosophical world was much interested in this enterprise. So Dewey has never been very popular among his fellow philosophy professors, but he happened to be the intellectual who best spoke up in public for the social democratic measures of the progressive era and the New Deal. So he was an important figure in American public life, even though the philosophy professors didn't have any great use for him. He kept up a steady stream of articles on the political issues of the day, trying to see the events of his time as leading up to a better America of the future. He had a utopian vision of social democracy, and indeed participatory social democracy, a dream that will probably never come true, but by keeping that utopian vision before the public, he did influence the public mood to some extent. It's true that the United States didn't approach the kind of welfare state that became the norm in Europe in the period after the Second World War. On the other hand, the difference between the U.S. in 1905, as the progressives were getting started, and in 1965, after Johnson had gotten the civil rights legislation passed, is enormous. So there was a very considerable shift toward the political left in the first half of the 20th century, and Dewey had as much to do with that as any other American intellectual. I don't think you can single Dewey out as having made a particular political contribution. He just stood for all the right causes for a long, long time. He was in favor of women's suffrage. He was against racial discrimination. He was in favor of increasing the power of the trade unions. These were all things that came to pass more or less in the course of his lifetime. I don't think you can find much of a connection between what Dewey said to the philosophy professors and what he said to the general public. The questions that he took up in response to people like Russell or Royce are just too remote from politics for one to claim that the one presupposed or entailed the other. In general, I don't think there's much connection between the kinds of things philosophy professors talk about to their colleagues and the kinds of things they talk about when they play a role in public affairs. Philosophical ideas are confined to 1% of the population, and they tend to be cosmopolites who are not easily identified with their country. I think democratic governments are run by experts. The only question is which experts are going to be in power at any given moment. Dewey's dreams of participatory democracy will never come true. I think American universities and Western universities generally have served democratic societies very well indeed. They've supplied experts who could then be associated with politicians who were voted in or voted out by the masses. That's the best we can expect.